The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.
Hey man, how's it going?
It's going well. What about you?
It's good. Welcome,
Thank you.
Daniel. It's nice to see you again and to be talking to you here. You're a
Absolutely.
you're a you're a veteran Instagram liver. Many of the people I've been talking to through these conversations, it's their first time, but
Oh my, I
you're
do it
quite
from time to
experienced.
time. Well, yeah, I mean, there's not really all that much to it. I mean, I am honored to be grouped in. I'm honored that you asked me and to be grouped in with some very illustrious guests you've had on here. Whether
Illustrious
they're,
is what I'm going for.
yeah, I mean, whether they're IG Live virgins or not, they're really a nice group of some lovely people, and I've been enjoying watching when I get a chance.
Yeah, I've been noticing you tuning in. I'm happy to see you pop up
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I'm usually making dinner.
Nice.
It goes well. So I'm not always watching, but I'm listening.
Yeah, I guess it makes me feel more like a part of people's homes to just kind of pop into people's lives while they're making dinner and stuff like that and fill their
Yeah.
minds with some stimulation.
Yeah, you're sort of back in lovely California,
Yeah. Yeah.
which
It's
is,
how I can be everywhere and nowhere at the same time.
oh, and speaking of everywhere, you know how you design that blotter art for me?
Yeah.
Um, one is on its way to the UK.
Nice.
So that's kind of nice. So that'll be like the first intercontinental Tam Integration blotter that goes out.
That's great.
Yeah.
So, yeah, why don't you tell people a little bit about what you do and what TAM integration is and things like that?
What I do is like, well, I'm a mindfulness-based transformational coach, and I have sort of found myself working mostly in the capacity of psychedelic preparation and integration coaching. And probably because I started a series of integration circles in the Bay Area and named it Tam Integration. Mount Tam, you know this, you grew up on it. Um, but you probably your listeners are familiar with the idea of like the sacred mountain, the holy mountain, the mountain as like sort of the shamanic world axis, the bridge between the lower, the middle, and the upper worlds. And sense of place is important to me. Being grounded and oriented is important to me. And Mount Tamalpais is our local mountain. And so, being that, we're talking to people who are having these sorts of journeys and these sorts of kind of expanded states of awareness, I wanted them to kind of remember that they have a place, right? That they belong where they stand, right? So, even those of you who happen to be listening to us right now, I just want you to maybe consider for a moment that you belong right where you are right now. And that right where we all are is sacred and holy ground. And so I named the thing Tam Integration, like in honor of, the sacred place that we inhabit on the land, and by extension, the sacred place that we inhabit in our hearts and our minds.
Hmm. I love it. I love it, especially because a lot of my formative psychedelic experiences took place on Mount Tam and
Hmm.
while hiking from the base to the top of the mountain. And perhaps
Right.
there's some kind of symbolism uh, behind not only ascending in my consciousness, but also literally ascending up this mountain as I do so.
Right. Well, do you want to share with us like one of your, see, this is what I do. I ask questions. Um,
Okay.
do you want to tell us about one of the more profound times that happened?
With Mount Tam, well, I mean, the first time I ever took mushrooms, I went out hiking in near the retreat center near where my family lives, where I grew up, which is on Mount Tam.
Hmm.
And I guess I spent the first part of that experience at home doing the kind of more MAPS protocol kind of thing with the sleep mask and music and stuff like that. But then
Hmm.
after a certain point, felt safe enough to explore and to go into nature. And I remember, I mean, I had walked in the forest my whole life, so I had been there so many times, but it allowed me to see things from a really fresh perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of, I saw the nature being this sort of orgiastic kind of display of life. Like there was something actually quite sexual about it, and seeing how life and nature in the forest was in this process of constant death and rebirth and
Mm-hmm.
procreation, and I was a part of that. I was breathing and exhaling, and the trees were taking life from me, and I was getting life from them. And yeah, it was a very profound experience to actually tangibly feel interconnected with the forest and with nature. And yeah, it was beautiful.
Did you, how's that influenced your painting, that experience?
I mean, I went from a death metal hesher to a third eye evangelist almost overnight. I
Mm,
think I mean, there was a bit of a gradation there, but it was a pretty radical reorientation of my identity in terms of, feeling like this sort of wounded misanthrope who was
mm-hmm.
very shy and kind of malignant and listened to extreme and dark and violent music, to somebody that was like wearing, white clothes with like rainbow scarves and, listening to random rap and stuff, and like
Right.
going to kirtans. So like it had a pretty big effect on changing my personality and my behavior, I'd say. And then that, of course, influenced my art from instead of making these like paintings of demons and ghouls and dark, morbid things, into trying to make rainbow colored, fractal, psychedelic vision paintings.
Right. Right on. Speaking of kirtan, I see that someone named Hanuman just popped in. Hi, Hanuman.
Wow. Nice.
Welcome to the podcast.
Shout out to Hanuman.
Shout out to Hanuman. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I'm curious how I think that what you do is really unique for the times that we're in. Like, when
Mm-hmm.
else in history have you been able to make a living doing psychedelic integration and preparation work with people? And that
Right.
goes to show that now is a time, it's kind of like a climax where people are using psychedelics in a really, I mean, it's more popular now in some ways than
Right.
it's ever been, ever.
There's a quote that's very, very influential for me. It's by this great saint and sage, um, Mr. Rogers. And he once said, we have to have more of this community expression of care. And, through my psychedelic experiences, like I found that to be true. In fact, I discovered that in on LSD before I heard the quote. And the quote was just
Hmm.
like, right, yes, Mr. Rogers gets it. You know, I mean, it's like that was one of the things that the expressions, like you're saying, like wearing white and going to kirtan and having rainbow scarves is a representation of an inner awareness of probably a deeper love, right?
Yeah.
That we care about each other. And can you repeat oh, someone, can you repeat the quote? I spaced out. Of course, I'm ADD too. If I wasn't the one talking, I would only be catching half of this as well. We've got to have more of this community expression of care. And I believe he said it in front of the Senate. The Senate
Wow.
wanted to defund public television. And the public television was like, we got to call in Fred Rogers. And he got up in front of them and just laid it down. And they were like, all right, there, you got your $1 million. Like all of these, like really tough, it's like, I think that perhaps the Senate committee, whatever it was not maybe full of as many sociopaths as it is today. They were probably a little less reptilian back then, I would like to believe. Um, but he got the money and he said, we've got to have more of this community expression of care. And So I believe that LSD showed me that that was true. And so psychedelic integration circles are an expression of that. Like, to
Yeah.
have people, because I do the one-on-one coaching, but then I also do like online group classes. We have a meditation intensive coming up, and we do these donation-based integration circles where people can just share and give and receive feedback.
Are
And
you
they're
doing this virtually now?
yes, yeah, we do them on Zoom every Wednesday,
Oh, cool.
Wednesday night, which is probably your Thursday morning.
Hmm.
Um, but while this stuff is all happening, right? And it's like the therapists are moving in and the venture capitalists are moving in and even, the church, people want to start churches and get in on the action. And so you have all these sort of people who are trying to tell everybody how to do it. And at the end of the day, the people, sorry, the people have to take care of each other. Like if this thing's going to thrive, and it's going to go the direction that like I want to see it going, it's like we need to show up for each other and like be there, like
Hmm.
for real on like a regular basis, because we live extreme lifestyles. We're doing weird shit and we're living in an extreme way, and we got to be there for each other. And so like that's what it's all about.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something that really has struck me when I've talked to more veteran psychonauts, people that were exploring psychedelics, say like in the 90s, or even, I
Hmm.
mean, people I've talked to from back in the 60s and stuff like that, but people that ordered the components to make DMT through the internet or through some kind of catalog and
Hmm.
created it themselves. And it was just a lot more kind of like, I think people were rolling the roulette wheel a little bit more
Mm.
extremely back then. And when I started getting into psychedelics, I had enough guidance to know about things like Erowid and to have enough sense to not take something from somebody I didn't know, or to be able to test things before I took them. There was
Hmm.
already a lot of harm reduction in place that made my experiences a lot safer and a lot more positive. And that's
Hmm.
only because of a lot of people having a lot of bad experiences and through a kind of collective organization of information that now exists. And I think that that's really important. I don't really believe that there should be some kind of dogma or sort of religion around psychedelics. And when people try to say that there is one way that you need to do it, that tends to irritate me a little bit. But I do think
Hmm.
that there needs to be elders, and you're kind of taking this role as one of the elders in the community that
Oh,
can
geez.
that can guide people through it a bit more safely, and just
Hmm.
simple things that people can be aware of that can make their experiences more positive and less harmful.
Right. You're reminding me, like, there was an Erowid when I first started getting high. Like, there wasn't the internet. Like,
Yeah.
and so we were sort of what you would learn. I'm thinking of how I learned it. It was probably like books by like Time magazine about the 60s, or about Woodstock. And it was just be like a photojournalism essay. And it'd be like, and then people took LSD and they took all their clothes off and danced to the music. And I'd be like, okay, that sounds awesome. That sounds great. But also, um, it's attracting, there's the people who want it, and then perhaps there's the people who need it. The people who are going to get, I mean, we all sort of, like, I sort of needed it in some way, but there are more cautious types, people that don't
Hmm.
necessarily, aren't willing to just take however much is around and just say, well, see you tomorrow. We'll let the chips fall where they may. I'm fascinated by the phenomenon these days of knowing your dosage. Like I feel like that's a relatively new phenomenon where, when I was a kid, it was just you got whatever you could get and then you just split it between whoever was there.
Hmm.
And you didn't really know. I mean, fortunately though, talking about harm reduction is that when I was a kid, there was no fentanyl, back in the day, and there was also really not NBOMAs. right? Which can be lovely in the right dosage, but can be fatal if you take too much.
What's
And
an embleme?
like 2CB, 2CB, 2CI, those
I've
sorts of
never heard that
things.
word before. Why do they call them emblemes?
Oh, N-bomb,
Oh,
N-B-O-M.
and bombs. Oh, oh
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Um, so it was
Right.
like that
The like
stuff
the dose that leads to overdose or toxicity with those substances is
is
it's
much
not that
lower.
much. Yeah.
And it didn't proliferate until the DEA really cracked down on the acid cooks,
Hmm.
right? It's like you would just get out. It was inconceivable to us that it would be anything other. It was either LSD or it was bunk. And that was the two choices. The fact that it might be like fentanyl and some sort of odd research chemical from China, like never occurred to anybody.
Right. Yeah, and I have a lot of friends who have had bad experiences by being given something that they didn't, that was some kind of research chemical, and they were expecting it to be something else, and it had a
Hmm.
strong experience, whether it was like DOM or it was NBOM or something like that. But
Hmm.
yeah, I think like this greater movement towards harm reduction, and I think it's important. I'm obviously not an advocate of abstinence, and I believe that if like people are going to experiment with substances, and that it's necessary, therefore, to teach people how to do it safely, so
Hmm.
that they don't hurt themselves.
Right. And so, once we get substance handled, it's like, okay, we know that what you're doing is what you know what it is, and you know how much you're going to take, and maybe you even have a nice space to do it in. You're going to have a nice room with good music and IMAS or nature. The next thing that I think is really important is mindset. When we start talking about like how do you organize your mind to have the best possible trip and to have a journey that's going to produce insight and information that you can use to grow as a person. And I sort of feel like there are ways to maximize that. And the thing is about it is that requires diligence and practice, right? There's a lot of the folks who are reading like Michael Pollan's book kind of want a silver bullet, and those of us
Hmm.
who maybe started as recreational users just was like, oh, okay, it's like I'll turn my phone off, or I don't have anywhere to be tomorrow, like I'm good to go. Um, but the idea of working with the mind, um, to have a more insightful time, I think is crucial. Can be super clutch.
I want to talk about that for a second. I mean, I think that our expectations of what the experience is going to be really dramatically influence the experience that we have.
Hmm.
And if you have an expectation that this is going to be a transcendental, life-altering, positive experience, you're going to be more likely to have that. If you treat it as something sacred, you're going to,
Hmm.
attract a more sacred experience. But I find that
Those are two different things.
yes, those are two different things. Okay, that's true. Yeah. But
An expectation and a mindset are two different things.
I think that our expectations help create our mindsets.
Right. Well, what I mean when I hear you say when I have an expectation, because I talk to people who have an expectation that they're going to have a transcendental experience or a breakthrough. Oh,
Right.
I want to have a breakthrough, and then I didn't have a breakthrough, and damn it,
Uh-huh.
no, and it's like, so there's this expectation of I think my experience should be one way, um, and then if it's not exactly the way I expect it to be, then that's a problem, as opposed to having a mindset where you prepare like the way the people who do a lot of ayahuasca do dietas, right? You do a
Hmm.
dieta and you pray and you fast and you journal and build altars. I mean, that's different than an expectation. That's like setting
Right.
yourself up to have a spiritual experience.
Hmm. Right. But it's an orientation towards your association with the actual act of taking it, So I
Yeah,
mean, I'm just using the word expectation because I can't really think of a better word right now.
got it.
But do you know what I mean though?
I do know what you mean. I just have that AA training in me where they say expectations lead to resentments.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. And I could see how that would be a problem. you know. And I mean, I've had ayahuasca ceremonies, for example, where I felt like nothing really happened.
Mm,
Where, and that's a fascinating thing about ayahuasca is sometimes you take very little and you have a really intense experience, and sometimes you take a lot and nothing really happens. But I just trust that those experiences where I've sat in ceremony almost completely unaltered, is that was the experience that I needed. I needed to
hmm.
just sit with being in a dark room for many hours, and to kind of be with the mundanity of that, or the boredom of that, and
Hmm.
to kind of like come to terms with reality in that way, and also hold space for other people.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, in those cases, having an expectation of having a stronger experience, and not, it did create a little bit of like dissatisfaction, I guess you could say.
Right. Well, I mean, that's life.
Hmm.
There's no
That
shortage
is
of
life.
there's no shortage of dissatisfaction in life. And it is always fascinating to me how willing people are to sit. Well, because there's stuff happening, right? There's content to process. Sitting in the dark on plant medicine versus sitting on the dark not in plant medicine for several hours.
Hmm.
It's like if we could get more people to just sit in the dark, you know, with a glass of water and an orange, for 6 hours and be like, that's your thing. I mean, transformation would occur.
I think so too. I think that the way in which ayahuasca ceremonies are conducted, with sitting in the dark for long periods of time by yourself and having the music that tends to accompany that, if you did that without even ingesting any medicine, that would
Hmm.
be a powerful experience by itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I was looking at pictures of the Huni Kun and
The Hui
they're
Kunin.
yeah, and they're Malokas.
Hmm.
And yeah, I mean it just really looks like regardless of anything else, those guys know how to put on a show.
Yeah. I've never done ceremony with them, but I've been invited to. I'd like to someday. It
Hmm.
seems very, very different than doing it with the Shipibo, because when I've worked with medicine with the Shipibo, you basically drink the medicine and then you're just alone in the dark, and that's it.
Hmm.
And they do the ikros, but it's not a form of entertainment. It's actually a way to treat specific ailments that people have, and
Right.
they sing. There's sometimes two, three people singing different songs simultaneously, and it's actually a very disharmonic kind of experience.
Hmm.
But the Hunikuin, they do it during the day. People dance, they sing, they have these beautiful feather head dresses. It's supposed to be a lot more kind of life affirming, whereas the Shipibo way is a lot more deathy, you know.
Right.
And I feel like the Shipibo way of drinking ayahuasca does prime you to have more near death type experiences as a result of its of the setting.
Right. Interesting. Very, very interesting.
Yeah. So
I've only sat with like, American hippie shamans,
mhm.
with that,
Yeah, I
and
have to.
not very often. And, it was basically, um, it was a like an iPod sort of musical situation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think we have to do the best with what we got, and
Hmm.
if you can't go to Brazil to sit with the Hunakuan, or Peru to be with the Shipibo, then sometimes having a comfortable bed, some candles, some incense, and your iPod, that's good enough.
Right. Right. I mean, I tend to personally, I don't go too far down like the ayahuasca rabbit hole. There seems to be, I want to be a good neighbor, and I know that there are people who are really kind of dedicated to that path, and I just sort of feel like I'm not, and if I was going to be, I would be already. And,
Mhm.
I'm an American, hippie kid, and I sort of have grown up on, psilocybin and LSD, and it works. Those work. And they're not endangered, and there's not a lot of cultural appropriation going on. It's like just kind of as far as like buy local sort of thing. There's something. There's
Right.
like a low carbon footprint and like a low cultural appropriation footprint for me in that way.
Hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And also, LSD, although it originated in Switzerland, there's something quite American about it. Also, seeing
Hmm.
as America was the place that adopted its use the most dramatically, even though
Right.
now it's spread to every part of the world.
Right. Well, I mean, I could, I can trace my lineage to like the Grateful Dead. Like it's a Grateful Dead
Yeah,
lineage, which is like, you know, uniquely, it's like a unique American wisdom tradition.
true. Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I guess that in a way, the Grateful Dead, they're kind of the medicine people of that tribe.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, there were times like I've learned a lot from like the old heads, who were just sort of like, they would just, you'd be in a weird place and they would just like wink and cough, and it would have the same effect as like an Icarus, they would just be like, it's like, all right, it'd be like, all right, man, or like, they just like throw a lyric at you, like one Grateful Dead lyric at you, and it would just sort of like bust through like all of the whole trip, into
Wow.
like a space of light.
Yeah,
And
wow.
and so that there are people there that know what they're doing.
That's cool. You see, I'm a little bummed out that I never will really have a chance to experience that. That was like an older generational thing that's just not quite the same now.
It's that, well, yeah, well, nothing's ever the same. Um,
Yeah.
what did that guy on the internet say? Consequences will never be the same on that viral video.
I
Yeah,
never saw that, but
yeah. There's some girl that was getting cyberbullied, and her dad came on the camera and yelled in the camera that he was going to call the cyber police and he was going to track them all down, and consequences would never be the same. And it's absurd and preposterous. There's nothing this guy can do. But that quote has stuck with me.
hmm. So I'm curious to hear more about also your sitting for psychonauts class.
Oh yeah, it just so happens. I mean, it feels weird to like sell stuff while the while people are fighting for justice in the streets, but I'll do it anyway.
Well, you
I
don't
mean,
have to necessarily sell it. I'm just curious about what it is.
well, I've got more spaces. I've got like three more seats, and it starts Friday at 9 a.m. Pacific time. So what it is, it's a collection of meditation practices that I've been working with, for the past 20 years that I have sort of found are the best for grounding, orienting, encountering the shadow, and integrating and stepping into joy and love. Um, and so we go through those topics and we look at meditation practices through a variety of traditions, from a couple of different Buddhist schools, Theravada and, Vajrayana and things like that, as well as Tantric Hindu practices and Ayurvedic practices, a little bit of just like a little bit of chaos magic sprinkled in for good measure. And it's a really nice group. And so it's designed as a self-care. So it's designed as a self-care program, right? It's like these are practices that you would do to prepare yourself to go on a journey at a higher level and to get more out of it. And what I have found is that a lot of people who show up are people who already guide or hold space for others or who are sort of wanting to. And it seems to work for them too. So while it's not called a training, because it's not a training because the training would take months, it's an intensive, and I really do my level best to lay practices at people's feet that if they do them, they will bear fruit, right? Like that's the really cool thing about like practices is that it's another obscure quote. I think it's Go, the game Go, or maybe it was Connect Four or something. Some board game would say a minute to learn, a lifetime to master. And so a lot of these
Mm.
practices are like really, really simple. But if you do them, they get really, really profound. Kind of reminds me of, have you seen Grant Morrison's talk on ultra culture about sigil
No, I'll
making?
definitely check that out.
It's great. It's a great talk. It's super fun.
Send me all the magical things.
Okay. And, he says these things actually work. Wouldn't you know? He's like, you guys
They
all,
do.
you read about it or you talk about it. Some people you complain, you think it's stupid, but like do it and see what happens. And, oh, can I tell a Buddha story? Do we have time?
Please. Yeah, we have
Um,
time.
there's the story of the Buddha of the white parasol. And these are the kind of gems you'll get if you sign up for sitting for Psychonauts meditation intensive. Um, so back in the day, you couldn't just get on Zoom and hang out with a teacher or just like hop in your car and go to like Esalen and spend a weekend with a teacher. Um, they were few and far between, like these enlightened Buddha, these lamas, these high Rinpoches. And so if you would hear, this is like Tibet or Nepal, you would hear that a guy was coming and he was like 3 days by ox cart, like you would go because the guy, like that was your chance. Like he would maybe be back in a decade. And so like everybody was going to go see this Rinpoche and get this empowerment. And the hero of our story went with everybody, went by ox cart, and he wasn't smart. The hero of our story was not blessed with a strong intellect. Um, not very good retention, and not very good comprehension. But he goes, and there's this whole crowd of people with the master, and he gives the instructions. And afterwards, our hero manages to get up to him to ask him a question. It was like, I don't understand. And the master says, which part? He was like, well, pretty much all of it. Like, I don't get it. And he goes, okay, well, I have a very special practice for you. He's like, what I want you to do is I want you to visualize a white parasol spinning above your head. And just like all day long, all you're doing is like you're visualizing white parasol, which is one of the 8 auspicious symbols, right, of the Buddha. So visualize
Hmm.
this auspicious symbol of the Buddha spiraling, twirling above your head. And so our hero, while he wasn't big on brains, he was huge on devotion and discipline. So he just did the practice, like all the time. And he did it so much that he attained a certain level of enlightenment. And people could see the white parasol floating above his head. Like people, if you were like in the right light at dusk or something, you would see the white parasol. And then sometimes it even seemed like he would float off the ground, almost on like these white puffs of wind. And he had the ability to heal people, right?
Wow.
So like just from doing this practice that the teacher made up just to shut the guy up. And so he's just so now our hero, our master of the white parasol, as he's been called in whatever, it's much more eloquent in Tibetan, um, is going around healing people. And meanwhile, our teacher has fallen ill. He's developed all of these boils and polyps in his throat, and it's hard for him to swallow, and it's hard for him to talk. And it's very, very painful. And one of his attendants says, I heard about this guy, the master of the white parasol, and we should go see him. He's going to be 3 days by ox cart. This is like 15 years later. He's going to be like, 3 days by ox cart. We should go. And they agree and they go. And so the teacher shows up, and the master of the white parasol sees his teacher. The teacher forgot all about him. He didn't know who it was. But the master of the white parasol didn't forget because it's his beloved guru. And he runs up to him and falls at his feet. And it was like, oh, master, I did my practice just like you said. And I've been just so blessed. And I'm so honored that you're here. And thank you, falls at his feet. And the teacher realizes what had happened, and his mind is blown, and he starts to laugh. And as he laughs, the boils in his throat break, and he all the pus comes out, and he's healed.
Wow.
And he brings him up, and he was like, hey, get up, you don't have to bow to me. He's like, I gotta let you in on a secret. Like, I was just messing with you. Like, that's not even a real practice. And the master of the white parasol, like, his face gets all ashen, and he's like, what? He's like, oh no. and his shoulders slump forward and the parasol disappears from view and his feet sink back onto the earth as he's walking away all dejected. And the teachers like realized what he's done. He was like, wait, no, come back. It was a test. It really is a real practice. You passed. And the parasol pops back up and he goes on to continue to be the master of the white parasol. And so I'm not suggesting anything other than practice works in unusual ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really nice to have things to fall back on when we're super high. Is what it comes down to. The Navy SEALs have a saying that says, when times are tough, you don't rise to the occasion, you sink to your level of practice.
True.
And so the more we can kind of get it into our bones and our tissues, I'm sure you've probably talked to a somatic coach at some point in your podcasts or something like that. But if you can get, these practices into your bones, then when weird stuff comes up, you'll have tools to deal with them. And they'll just be like in your muscle memory.
Well, yeah. That story reminds me of what is the name of this documentary with the guy that was a sort of fake guru, or he was just a normal man who decided to pretend that he was a guru. You know what I'm talking about?
I remember it. I don't remember what it's called.
Man, if somebody knows, they can drop a comment. But yeah, he was a normal guy. He was, I think he was American or Canadian, but he was of Indian descent, and he decided to pretend that he was a guru from India in Middle America and started making up these practices, much like that people were doing, and it changed their lives. Just because they believed that he had the power to help them and that these practices actually would work. They started genuinely having spiritual insight.
Well, I mean, the thing is like, if you think about what their lifestyle was maybe like before, it was just hamburgers and television, like almost any amount of sitting and chanting something weird and breathing in a funny way is going to produce better results than McDonald's and television.
True.
Like, it would be hard to give someone a practice that would do worse.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Yeah, and how much of that does have to do with just your lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. And it's also, if you can enkindle somebody's devotion, the devotion will take them a long way, I think is what it comes down to.
Mm-hmm.
Better to have devotion and some kind of janky ass like sadhana to do than like no devotion and like a perfectly planned out yoga practice.
Cool. Yeah, I love that. I want to change gears a little bit because you're on the US. It does feel weird to be doing these podcasts without even addressing or discussing the circumstances right now in the US. And I'm just curious what your experience is being there right now. Is there anything happening in San Rafael, like protests or anything like that?
I mean, I think a couple of moms marched around to high school yesterday, but Marin doesn't traditionally go very hard when
No,
it comes
it
to stuff
doesn't.
like that. It's like Oakland, things were happening in the SF. I mean, I'm horrified. I mean, I'm absolutely horrified at the war crimes that are being committed against American citizens
Yeah.
by the police, and I believe they're sending military out.
Yes.
Um, I would prefer it if the military showed some conscience and just stood down. There was I believe the New York City bus drivers unions refused to transport protesters. Right, in New York, they were arresting a bunch of people and then loading them on the buses and then telling the bus drivers, you have to drive us here. And the bus drivers were getting off the bus. They were like, we don't work for you. It's like, we're not down. We're not down. We're with the people. We're a bus drivers union. Like, and so they kind of understood where their bread was buttered. And, unfortunately, the ruling class's bread is buttered, on the side of a unaccountable police force and a systemically racist government justice system. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. It's absolutely heartbreaking and also very inspiring that people will show up to make a difference. That people, under threat of violence, are continuing to show up to make a difference, and I'm very, very inspired by that. And yeah, yeah. I mean, I would much prefer. And then they killed somebody last night again. A cop shot a guy who owns a barbecue restaurant. For just kind of being somewhere loud and scary. They just open fire and this guy dies. And who knows how many people are going to die tonight? People are going to die tonight, because they are tired of being murdered by police that are shown no accountability.
Yeah. Something that concerns me is that I think that most of the violence is being incited by the police. And from what I've seen through social media videos of the protests are peaceful up until the police start sending tear gas into the crowds and beating people up and inciting violence. And then people become uncentered and unglued and they start to retaliate. And then it escalates into this
Hmm.
big dramatic conflict that then the media turns around and says people are violently protesting, which isn't actually true. It's a lot more nuanced than that. And I'm a little
Right.
worried about um,
I mean,
governments using that.
I mean, it's my sense there are some straight up riots and looting. And
Yeah.
I'm not trying to judge I'm not trying to judge people, for trying to have their voices heard, and for expressing, decades and generations of frustration. Like it's not my intention. I would like the system to recognize that it's fucked up and do something about it. And the people in power are not. They're doubling down, and they're doubling down, with violence against humans, which is different than violence against target,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, in a just society, Target would also be pissed off that people are getting murdered in the streets by police. Like, why isn't Target saying something? It's like, where are they? They don't care.
Hmm.
Where's the community care? That's what it comes back to for me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like our definitions of ourselves determine our actions. So if you have a definition of self that includes people of all kinds, whether they're a police officer or not, whether they're black or white or whatever, then you're going to be oriented to care for yourself.
Hmm.
But I think that it's an identity thing where the police seem to really see themselves as being separate from the people, and to
Hmm.
look at the people as being the other that they need to be dominant over, and they have their own agendas that are being threatened by them. And
Hmm.
yeah, I think it really comes down to our orientation of what we look at as ourselves and
Right.
who we see as our community.
Yeah. And it's hard when, it's interesting watching these guys in all this riot gear. Somebody was showing me pictures of protests 20 years ago, I think for some, maybe like WTO or, some sort of trade agreement or RNC protests in Philly. And all of the cops were just wearing blue shirts. Like there was no riot gear. Riot gear's new. They passed some kind of law that allowed the military to sell military grade equipment to local police forces. And so that's why,
Hmm.
there are tanks and bazookas and tear grenades and like all of this insane violent shit that these guys train in. And it's a militarized force, right, on American soil, that is
Hmm.
being deployed against its own citizens.
Yeah, and this has been happening for a long time too. I remember years ago seeing uh, images that were showing where military, uh, you know, arms were being purchased by police forces and all the different places in the US that had them. And it's been growing over many years, these like
Hmm.
stockpiling, the militarization of police. Something that concerns me is how the governments could use the situations and use the media to get the people to sign off on them doubling down on authoritarian measures and control. Like
Oh yeah.
to, to say, okay, so people are being violent and unruly, and we need to control this. And to sell that story through the media, even though it's a lot more nuanced and a lot of the violence is being incited by police. And for the majority of people who are just at home, like, stoned on McDonald's and watching the news are going to be like, yeah, we got to do something about that. You want to take away our freedoms and enforce greater governmental control. Yeah, let's
Hmm.
do that.
Right. The president says that he wants to classify Antifa as a terrorist organization. Antifa is not an organization. Like, there's no Antifa headquarters. There's no Antifa leadership. It's just like a bunch of people who don't like fascism that are scattered just around. It's just sort of, if you don't like fascism, you're Antifa. But if you classify this thing as a terrorist organization, you can basically just Guantanamo people for no reason. It's like, oh, you just must be. It's like it's sort of the opposite of AA, right? It's back to AA where they say you're a member if you say you are. Whereas like Antifa is sort of like you're a member if they say you are.
Yeah.
It's like you do something that is kind of against the fascist authoritarianism that is proliferating, and you get labeled as such and you're gone.
Mm. Yeah, it's scary, and I don't want to impose the idea that things could get this bad, but if you look at like Nazi Germany, like Germany was a first world country, like a thriving nation, and then
Hmm.
there was the rise of the Nazis, and it's like if it could happen there, given what society was, it could happen anywhere. If people are
Hmm.
complicit to it, and people are complicit to it through a lot of psychological tactics utilized by the media, mostly
Hmm.
to help brainwash people. You know,
Yes.
um, so that stuff is very concerning for me. I mean, obviously, like the overt racial conflicts too have been going on for, a long time, and it's something that needs to be dealt with. But I think that the governments or kind of the ruling class could be exploiting the situation for their own means.
Oh, undoubtedly. And you hear people parading around on MSNBC. It's like, oh, this just makes it even more important that you vote, which is absurd because, I mean, Biden put the laws into place that allowed this militarization to happen in the first place. There's like neither side cares, actually gives a shit. Both the Republicans and the Democrats would like things to go back to normal so that the upper class and wealthy people can be comfortable. Like there's no, there's no overt or obvious effort to actually address what's going on coming from either side of the aisle.
Yeah.
And, there was this chance. I mean, not to get all Bernie bro on Twitter or anything, but, there was a chance for like a peaceful resolution with Comrade Sanders. And we saw, the Democratic Party was very effective at squashing that, right? Very coordinated, throughout all of the media channels and um, all of the voter fraud um, and suppression. You're aware about the voter fraud.
No, tell me.
So the UN has this thing that, they do exit polls, right? So when you leave, or entrance poll, you leave and they say, who'd you vote for? And you say, I voted for Bernie. And then they look at the polls, and then they look at the ballots. And if the discrepancy is more than 4%, then that's evidence of tampering, right? So through various states around the country, tampering was like the discrepancy was like as high as 12 or 15% in some places. And it was always in favor of Biden. Like there was never
Hmm.
a discrepancy that was in favor of Bernie. And then they were sometimes 3 or 4 times greater than the limit that the United Nations set. So
Hmm.
like that was a thing, and we don't talk about it, right? And so they were very good at that. And the government seems to be very good, and these are a lot of these cities are run by Democrats, right? And this should not be taken as me being pro-Republican, because fuck
Mm-mm, no.
fuck them all, Howie Hawkins, Green Party. There's never been a better time to try and get 5% vote at the Green Party. Something happens if the Green Party gets 5% of the vote, like they get a whole new status. So like there's never been a better time to vote for Howie Hawkins. Um, but a lot of these cities are have Democratic leadership, and they're still trotting out the cops.
Yeah.
Democrats are just, maybe a little bit more, um, you know, hurt about the fact that they have to beat you into submission. Like it's like, the Democrats, it's almost like, oh, this hurts me as much as it hurts you. Which is this is not true, because you're shooting young girls in the face with rubber bullets, and wounding them, scarring them for life.
Yeah.
So it's not like there's a solution that's going to be had at the ballot box. And anybody who suggests otherwise is has got Stockholm syndrome.
Hmm. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, we have about 5 minutes. I just want to give you like a warning about that.
Whew, I got
But
fired. I don't usually talk politics, man.
yeah, no, it's good.
I
I
like
mean,
to
for
talk
me,
about Buddhist monks.
yeah, I know. I don't usually talk about this stuff either, but it's like I grew up in, Marin County. I think that there's a lot of pride in being like a Democrat and stuff like that. And there's a lot of emphasis put on things. But I would say that, I'm waking up more to the fact that it's not really about Democrats versus Republicans. It's more about these people in a position of power, which includes both Democrats and Republicans,
Hmm.
and they are very threatened by anything that might subvert the hold and the power that they have. And that's sort of just the truth of the situation. And yeah, the whole divide between Republican and Democrat, it's just a diversion to
It's a,
waking
t-
up to that
it's a,
truth and realization.
it's a total diversion. I mean, we've got just like, we've got two guys with dementia that probably shit their pants on a regular basis. And one is sort of like a very shouty, loud racist, and another guy just enacts racist policies over and over and over and over and over again.
Hmm.
Like nothing. Rave Act. Remember the Rave Act, right? Which is the reason you can't test your drugs in festivals in America, is a Joe Biden thing,
Hmm.
right? Is the reason, like if they allow drug testing at their festival, the producers of the festival could get arrested for being complicit in illegal activity. And
Hmm.
that's a Joe Biden invention.
We're
I
uh, we're
love
getting like we're getting dangerously close to like the amount of time that we have, but it's just like I wonder if there was ever a time in history where there wasn't a dramatic separation between those in a ruling class and those below it. And it could there be a society that is built around balance and harmony between people of divergent interests?
I want to say yes, and I also just want to tell everybody who's listening that I love you. In case we
All
get
right,
cut
all
off, I
right.
just wanted to like slide in like a big, big, heartfelt appreciation for your time and attention.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for listening. We can still keep going for a little bit. I just what are things in your opinion that we can do given the situation at hand to stay connected to our highest selves?
Well, I think consider what is the felt sense of being connected. Like it's like how do you organize your body in such a way that you get connected? Like don't think that you're not going to get there by furrowing your brow and clenching your fists and wish that you should get there. It's like what does the metaphor for connection look like to you? Are you opening, right? So then you got to open your body. Are you delving, right? You got to figure out how to go deep. And so like just pay attention to the metaphors that are right for you and try to organize your body around that. Organize your heart around it. It's the
Mm,
best thing I can come up with off the top of my head. Let people know,
yeah.
be in service. Let some like hook somebody up that can't necessarily do anything for you. It's like hook people up and get just like programmed, like just program your default mode network for compassion and care.
Hmm.
And you'll be stoked. I mean, or I guarantee it, or triple your misery back.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that like I've felt somewhat, I don't know, like I feel a little bit like there's not too much I can do, but I think that, and I feel like a lot of people feel that sense of powerlessness, but I think that helping somebody is something that anybody can do.
Mm-hmm.
There's always, in this circumstance, there's a lot of people who need help, and that might just mean people need to be made to smile or something like that. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
also helping people. Being kind to people is helping.
Yeah. Yeah. Be kind to people. It doesn't take much. And it's like
Mm-mm.
a super fun game. Like, isn't that like a really fun, like, day after a psychedelic journey trip to just like, inject like the room with sparkles?
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
like just that kind of thing.
Yeah,
How do you
absolutely.
make everybody's, what do you got to do to like help make everybody's wildest dreams come true? What if we were just focused on that? Let's just make everybody's wildest dreams come true.
I love that.
Yeah.
All right, man. Well, you've helped make my wildest dreams come true by
Woo!
helping my podcast journey along.
Well,
Thanks so much
I
for
love the discipline. I love that you're actually doing it.
I'm doing it, man. I've been talking about it for a long time. It's happening.
Mm-hmm.
All right, bro. Much love. Thanks for tuning in, and
Much
much love to
love.
everybody who's been listening as well.
Jai
We love you.
Hanuman. Jai Hanuman, Hare Krishna.
Jaya! All right, man. Be well.
Be well.
The Quarantine Sessions podcast with J. Cole.